What was the Atelier Zero project?
Okay, Atelier Zero was a project that we worked on last year. It was a collaboration between two schools of architecture, some architects based in Berlin called the Office for Subversive Architecture, and an international curator called Jane Anderson. So there were 24 students involved in the project to design what we called at the beginning a unique installation based on work, play and community.
So what happened then? How did the project
Well, it started off with a conversation a long time ago with between Jane and Professor Tom Jeffries, our head of school, where they wanted to bring a project together that celebrated the cultural aspect of the 2012 Olympics. That developed into a huge bid to the Arts Council for the Cultural Olympiad funding aspect of the Arts Council. And then around February-March last year time, the activity of the school took place in a much bigger way, and I was asked to get involved and find 3 fifth-year students to kind of coordinate the project with myself and Laura, just kind of overseeing it as a member of staff, which we thought at the time would be just a minor role, but that kind of developed into quite a significant role to play within that. But we won the Arts Council funding, but only within about 3 hours of actually starting on site, so we didn't even know that we'd even got the money. It
was a project that started, I think, in quite a different place to where it ended up. I think when we first kind of started out on the project, you really did have no idea about what the project was going to be, and that was quite important. So the funding bid that was put together by Tom and Jane just said a unique installation, and at this point we had no idea, and it was really important, I think, for us and for other people involved that it was a student-led initiative. So we had no idea. I mean, the project,
we didn't know what it was going to look like.
No,
at one point we didn't even know what the site was.
No, that wasn't
how much money we had, who would be working on it, how much it was going to cost, etc., etc. So it was a collection of complete unknowns, really, until March, when over the Easter vacation, our students then started working on the project quite intensively, and quite intensively, but in quite this kind of panicky way, because they only had 10 days to actually propose something, whereas the Parisian students had about 3 months to work on the project.
What's the importance of international collaboration in architecture school?
I think the nature of Manchester being such a wide-ranging international school, where we've got students from all over Europe and the rest of the world as well. I think nearly 30 or 35 countries are represented just within the first year, for example, means that we've already got collaboration happening. But certainly from our perspective as a teaching and learning activity, then it's really exciting to work with people who teach in another country and students that are learning in another country, and just all those possible negotiations that might then take place between language barriers and cultural differences and design process differences as well.
So would you say that this was the most difficult part about organising collaborative projects between so many different people?
Yeah, it's one of the things that's difficult. I think the dialogue that happens between all the different people, and you want to call them stakeholders, even though I don't really like that term, all the different stakeholders in the project. And I think that's something that our role, or part of our role, kind of facilitating the project was working in between all these different people. So you have the people who are funding the project who want something very specific. You have the people who own the land who want something very specific. You have students who want to take something away from the project very specific. And I think that it's that real awkwardness between all of those sort of parties that was kind of our role to a certain extent. And equally, and again, this is something that we came into, this kind of risk factor, and us living in this world where risk is such a huge factor. And from our perspective, even though it appeared to be this thing that popped up in the city centre, we were actually responsible for it as an institution. So there was legal requirements, there was risk requirements, and all of those things happen in the background.
You talk about the negotiations with the unnegotiable. What do you mean by this?
It was a really fine line that actually came about because we were planning to write some research papers about the project. And once we started to map out the whole of the project, we actually started to see that there were people within the project, and I'll give you an example of this, such as the owner of the site, that thought they knew what they wanted from the project and thought they knew what they were getting, but hadn't necessarily engaged with all of the processes that we'd gone through, or weren't invited to engage with all of those processes. And that became a level of negotiation outside of the remit of what the students were experiencing that I think Laura and myself took on in an incredibly serious way, because at the end of the day we had to have it signed off from the school, have it signed off from the insurance company, have all the risk and method statement stuff signed off as well before anything could start. And like I said earlier on, we didn't have the funding in place until about 3 hours after I think we started on site.
Yeah.
So there was all those things that people didn't want to negotiate, and we had to try and negotiate with them. And it was often our wonderful charm and sophisticated negotiation skills that I think played a big part in that. Yeah. Or just being belligerent.
I was going to say, I think that was just really stubborn people. Because there were certain times when people just said no. And I think that was the reality of the project. There were certain things that were happening, or there were certain negotiations that started with a flatline no, that we then needed to find a different way of doing.
What were the original intentions set out at the start, and did the final build live up to the predictions?
It was about having fun in the city. It was about using a space that wasn't already used in a very successful way and drawing some attention to it. It was about some level of community engagement. It was about the collaborative aspect between different schools, and it was about the students building something and learning from that and the different stages that you go through.
The project was always destined to be temporary, so has it lived beyond its duration on site?
Definitely.
Yes, I think it has. I think, well, again, there's the sort of slightly cheesy thing. I think it's lived with us all in terms of, I think the experience will always have that. And I think that the students that we shared that experience with and the collaborators that we shared that experience with, I think will always share that. So that's the kind of cheesy, emotional side of it. But physically, the sheds have been relocated. So the boating lake, the sheds are now in some community centres. There's a boat on the roof of OSA's office, which we think they stole, but they say they've just borrowed for a while. There's one in an art gallery in the city centre. There's going to be one going into Tatton Park. So there's a number of sheds that are kind of dispersed across the city. So I think from that respect, every square metre of material has been reused or is being stored here, ready to be reused. Yeah. So that aspect of it, I think, is really, really
and
positive.
We were quite determined to have that continued legacy that might happen with the project that goes beyond just it sitting in a space in the city centre.
And looking back, how important was Atelier Zero?
I think personally, and from a school perspective, it was one of the most important things that I feel like I've done, and I mean that quite honestly. I think that it pushed a lot of boundaries for me in terms of allowing me to see how much we could do by putting a group of people together. So from my perspective, I think it was a really important part, certainly of my career, but also I think of what we've done as a school.
It pushed some tolerance levels as well with people, didn't it? On a personal level and with students, and how much they committed to making it work till 10 o'clock on site from 8 o'clock in the morning, you know, on a number of days in pouring rain. I think it pushes personal boundaries. But certainly in terms of the location within the school, I think it's been a good building block for for allowing collaborative projects, big collaborative projects, but also buildable projects to happen with students who aren't qualified, who haven't done it before, on a real site with a real budget, etc., etc. And I think that's a great learning experience for our students.